You're listening to the Jan Price Show, all about movies. And today, my guest is Peabody Award-winning director Abby Ginzberg. And we're going to be talking about her brand new documentary entitled Barbara Lee, Seeking Truth to Power. Welcome to the show, Abby.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's my honor, actually. You have had such an illustrious career, doing amazing documentaries for years and years. And it tends, most of the things that you've done have been more so about social injustice. Is that a correct assessment?
Yes, more or less. I mean, what I do is let me sort of reframe it a little bit by saying I tend to do documentaries about people that are not well known, but who I believe, if they were better known, would inspire others in the same way that they have inspired me. So I don't make movies about people like Martin Luther King and Nelson Mandela, but to the extent that some of my characters have had interactions with them, then they become kind of background figures, and these unknown, lesser known people, sort of get center stage in my films. But almost every film I've had has been about either racial justice, social justice, some story about somebody being the first or one of the first few, say, African Americans on the bench, or the first Latino appointed to the California Supreme Court, or, Albie Sachs, one of the first judges on the Constitutional Court of South Africa. So I'm interested in telling stories of lesser known people, or people who I think need a bigger spotlight. And then just through the normal course of sort of, kind of distributing a documentary, their stories get out to a broader audience. And similarly with Barbara Lee, I felt like her story really needed to be better known outside of her district and outside of her constituents. And so that led me to kind of pitch her the idea that, please let me do a film about you. And it took her a long time to say yes.
Did it really? Why?
What she would say if she was sitting here is, I'm a private person. I have enough cameras in my face. I really, I feel like my job is, to work on Congress and legislation and with my constituents. And what do I need some camera crew following me around for? And she would also say that I was extremely persistent and a bit patient, which I was. And eventually I wore her down. Eventually my perseverance wore her down. And she eventually agreed to do it. And I think, today would say she's very grateful that she did, because it has done exactly what I thought it would, which is introduce her to a much wider audience. People are not that interested in somebody else's congressperson, but when they hear Barbara Lee's story, they're like, well, she's interesting. So I think that's made a difference in terms of the receptivity of the public to the film.
Well, I live in California, and I just moved to Santa Barbara, but I was living in Carmel, close to, Oakland, where her constituency is. And I knew of her, but I didn't know about her. So I agree with you. It was a wonderful, eye-opening movie. It really is an eye-opening movie, and discovering more about who she really is. Because a lot of people don't follow the politics. You're right. If it's not their congressman or woman, they're not following it. So.
And let me say, so one of the things that sort of proved that to me was, we tell the story of her lone no vote right around 9/11 in the film. Well, people kind of know in the back of their minds that there was one lone no vote. They don't know who the person was, why the person voted that way, what was motivating her, and how correct she was. So right. In the run-up to the 20th anniversary of 9/11, Barbara got a lot of attention because people had to figure out who was that person, and then interviewed her. And I feel like in a way the film was ahead of its time, to call out what an important and, kind of scary move it was on her part. She did not know she was going to be the only no vote. She just knew she had to vote her conscience. She's never apologized for that vote, and in fact stands by it even more intensely than she would have maybe even at the time. But there were a lot of negative repercussions. And so understanding, what it meant to be the lone no vote against giving Bush unlimited military authority, it was huge in her life. And I think, it's inspiring. Part of what people in the film say is that it was inspiring to them, to AOC or to Ayanna Pressley, to know that some sometimes you just have to vote your conscience and come what may. You've got to just stand, as they say, stand out there on the street corner and wait for other people to finally join you, which is exactly what happened with Barbara. So over time, the House has in fact voted, and the Senate hasn't yet, but it may one day, to repeal the AUMF, which gave presidents this unlimited military authority. So I feel like, history has kind of proved Barbara right on this one.
Oh, 100%. And you know what was so surprising? First of all, that she was the only no vote. But that so many, other people that, thought about it afterwards kind of wished that they had voted with her and regretted that they didn't. I thought that was interesting that you were able to find.
So let me say, so did I. Okay. And I was interested that they were willing to admit it. We're talking John Lewis, we're talking Jim Clyburn, we're talking former Representative Lynn Woolsey, who's very progressive. I mean, these are progressives in Congress.
Right.
And I think the fact that they didn't vote with her reflects just how intense that post 9/11 moment was, which was Barbara's whole point. We shouldn't be voting on this right now. We should be grieving. We should be, just like let it wash over us and let us see where we end up. But don't come to us 2 days after 9/11 and say, give up Congress's war-making authority. She was like, no, we're not doing that. So I agree with you. I thought it was very interesting that these other Congress people were all willing to, kind of reflect back and say, boy, I wish I'd had the strength of character she did. Or that I'd seen the world as clearly as she saw it at that moment. She understood in a way that almost nobody else did that this was the wrong moment to come and have that debate in Congress. And, again, history proved her right. But it was, after we've had 40 plus incursions, interventions, and military actions across the globe, that's a little late.
I know. I was shocked when I saw that. That statistic was just surprising to me. I had no idea that had been used that much. And that blew me away too. Here's a woman that I just love it when people just stand up for their convictions, just like John Lewis. I had Dawn Porter on my show with her documentary Good Trouble about John Lewis. And she was on about a month or so before John Lewis died, actually. And, here's another person who just, come what may, putting his life on the line and danger for his beliefs. And she has done the same thing. I was shocked also by your documentary that she had death threats, that people were, talk a little bit about that, because that was also surprising to me too.
Well, and there were thousands of them. We only show a handful. There are boxes of, emails that were printed out and hate notes that she got and so on. And basically she says it in the film. She says, if people were so mad at me for voting my conscience, she said, people don't understand democracy. Right. We have a right to dissent, and I needed to dissent against the 60-word AUMF that I thought was badly drafted and inappropriate and should not have taken Congress's war-making authority away from us. And people thought she was unpatriotic, a traitor, deserving of death threats, etc. And she personally, literally, could not leave Washington, D.C. for many weeks after this. Her son describes, the FBI shutting off his street so that she could come finally visit him. They didn't want to let her come back to the Welcome Home rally that her local constituents had put together, 3 months later. And she eventually said, I'm just going. You got to let me go. And she did come. But it's, you begin to see, and then there were people who apologized to her. She tells a story, it's not in the film, of a man who brought his child to a campaign rally she was doing for somebody else in North Carolina. And he came up to her and he said, I was one of those people who wrote you a death threat note or some negative thing. And he said, I need to apologize. That was not appropriate. So she said, it's at moments like that it's almost worth going through what you go through to have somebody realize that that was an inappropriate response. So yeah, people, and I have to say, Barbara is very security conscious to this day based on that experience. And we're talking 20 years later. Now, January 6th, upped the ante on, I mean, because there's been evidence that there were, certain members of Congress were going to be targeted and they were looking for people. So issues of security, not just for Barbara, but for many people in the House, remains kind of a top priority. And we should just know that now, it's not just people are kind of serving in Congress, et cetera, et cetera. It's like they're doing it at what feels like a lot of personal risk to themselves. And so my levels of gratitude go up even more that people are willing to serve during this very conflicted time.
I know it is surprising when you do hear from a lot of people, senators and Congress.
And all you have to do is look at the numbers. I mean, again, Barbara is really admirable all around her. People who have served even less time in Congress than she has. She's going under like 24th year. Wow. So, and she's going to run again and be hopefully reelected again and, keep going. But the number of people that are deciding, no, I'm not running, either I'm done, I'm retiring, or I got to go get another job or whatever. It's a lot of them. And so the fact that Barbara still feels like, look, this is what I'm good at doing. I have this long history, and there are still fights that have to be fought in Congress on issues like the child tax credit and Build Back Better and abortion rights. I mean, all the issues that we're just seeing, being bandied about in Congress. I mean, Barbara is, one of the leaders of trying to keep, government doing what it's supposed to do over time. And it's a tough road and it's a hard job and it's an uphill climb. So my hat is off to her and her colleagues who are just slogging through this.
I agree. And it's got to be, I mean, we've both been around long enough to know that I've never seen anything like this. We've seen division, but nothing like this ever. And the jobs for all of them are becoming more and more difficult to do, and to follow your conscience. A lot of the people just
I would just say Barbara's digging in. Barbara will continue to follow her conscience. I'm not the least, you know what I mean?
I'm not worried about that either, but we need more.
Yeah, she's not under pressure to really give up her conscience, and she wouldn't do it. I mean, right. At the point where she couldn't follow her conscience, she's out of the job.
Right.
So there's no question. And that also goes to why I wanted to make this film, is that I wanted to do kind of a deeper dive into, what is it about people's backgrounds that lead them to be particularly good advocates in the moment for things? So, we see her on the floor of Congress talking about food stamps. Well, she was somebody who had a tough time in her life, needed to be on food stamps. We see her mention that she got a federal government loan to buy a house in Oakland when she was a single mother with 2 kids. She understands the needs of the particularly Black community for healthcare and breakfast programs that the Black Panthers started. So there's a way in which, by having lived through sort of so many of these issues in her own life and felt the contradictions about whether or not she was going to be able to get help, she really sees herself as a frontline fighter on behalf of all the other women coming behind her who need help. And her view is the government should be here to help you.
Right.
Not to make it impossible for you to raise your kids, not to make it impossible for you to hold a job because you don't have childcare, not to make it impossible for you to go to school because you can't afford the school loans. So all I can say is that, her own personal background did a great deal to shape her and to shape, the kind of legislating that she is really committed to.
It was interesting that she wasn't really willing in the beginning to talk about that she had been on food stamps and had, subsidized housing, or, had really benefited from the government programs. And so what changed her mind to finally...
I think Lynn Woolsey says it in the film. Lynn said, Barbara, if we've been on welfare and we're not willing to say it in public and on the floor of Congress, who will? Right. And that, I think Barbara just did a 180 at that point and just said, okay. They were at that point, I think, the 2 welfare moms. There are now others, Cory Bush has been an amazing leader about being unhoused. And, but Barbara, she was, again, this whole thing about I'm private, I don't share my private life. She got over that pretty quickly. And Lynn Woolsey on the issue of being a welfare mother, I think really helped her break out of the, I can't talk about this box she was in. And she's been talking about it ever since. And because of the big uproar, for good reason, today about abortion, she and Pramila Jayapal and Cory Bush did an amazing, this was after the film was released, public testimony in Congress about what it meant to get abortions, and for Barbara when it was illegal in Mexico. That's not even in the film because I felt like that was kind of going a little too far. So I stayed away from that in the film, knowing that let me say, I have her in the film talking about being a victim of domestic violence.
Right.
That has led to her being a big supporter of the Violence Against Women Acts, both in California and federally. The abortion story, although I knew it, I did not feel like I needed, I didn't feel like I personally needed to put it in the film. I thought other things spoke for themselves. But I was so proud of her when she and Pramila Jayapal and Cory Bush testified in Congress, because I knew how hard that was for her. That was her first kind of going public with this story. And the fact that all three of these women with three very different stories, were able to say, look, this is personal. We've been there. We know what it means. And each of us had a different reason for needing an abortion. And each of us would have had terrible consequences in our personal lives if we hadn't had one. So we've got to fight to keep this being a right for other, American women.
I couldn't agree with you more. It's funny. It's interesting. I think your film is so complete with so many wonderful things in it. That would have been just one more thing that might have taken away from the focus that you were trying to be, that your film is definitely telling this particular story about her. Yet there might be another film about that, another documentary.
That's funny that you sort of say that. I mean, it's like, I really feel like that, just that little clip. I mean, maybe if this goes up somewhere, I can send you a clip and you can add it so people can watch this, because I found that testimony so compelling. And, my reaction over the last weeks and months in terms of what the Supreme Court has been doing is, you should be ashamed of yourselves. I'm old enough to say that I was in college when abortion in New York State, I went to Cornell, so it was in New York State, went from being illegal to legal. But you still couldn't get an abortion in Ithaca, New York. You had to go to New York City. You had to know someone. First you had to do a back alley abortion in New York City. And then as it became more legal, one did not know how to find them. And so we created a little group of people at Cornell, that were essentially the referral agency once it became legal in 1970 in New York. But if you lived in Illinois, as a new movie called The Janes points out, forget it.
Right.
It was being done by non-professionals in hotel rooms. So the idea that this current Supreme Court has the gall to want to push women back into those days, it is appalling to me.
I couldn't agree with you more about this.
I'm beyond angry about this. And so, yes, there are going to be more movies. There's two fabulous movies made. One called Jane, which is the dramatic version about what happened in Chicago, and the other is The Janes. They both premiered at Sundance in the last week, and they're both fabulous. I've seen them both.
Well, interesting, because I saw one called The Janes a number of years ago, actually, at the Napa Film Festival. Is it the same one that's finally coming?
It's brand new. It's brand new.
Okay.
And they went and they found as many of the Janes, which was the name, that they used for this group of women in Chicago. They also found a guy who was not a doctor who was performing the abortions. And at some point he said, I've had enough, I'm leaving. And he trained all the women how to do it. So this was, the idea, again, it's not the most complicated procedure, but if anything goes wrong, you can bleed out and die. It was, that's how desperate women are.
I know. I was blessed. I had a very progressive mother. I used to say liberal. That had a bad connotation, but progressive. And she actually told me, when I was in college, and I'll age myself too. It wasn't legal, and she said, if you ever find yourself pregnant, let me know, and we'll make sure you have an abortion. And that wasn't. People weren't talking about that. That was not something that particularly mothers. For telling their daughters. Thank God I didn't have to do that. But the fact that she was supportive enough and felt that was important. So.
Yes. Well, I had a similar mother, but anyway, the idea that we are going back there
Yes.
is just shocking to me. So yes, okay, well, we're done about the Janes. We can go back to Barbara, but I
Back to
felt
Barbara.
like her testimony was really moving. And Barbara is a leader on so many important issues, so her own story around the abortions, one level of it, the story I tell in the film, which is about her work around HIV and understanding, that this is where Barbara's ahead of her time and ahead of the curve. Mm-hmm. Barbara is aware of how things are impacting, particularly the African-American community, before anybody is talking about inequality or disproportionate impact or any of that. So back in the day, when everybody thought that HIV was a white gay male disease, Barbara was looking at the impact it was making and taking on Black women and men in Oakland, and was able to do, some work, as we show in the film, with Keith Carson of the Alameda County Board of Supervisors, to declare it an emergency, a public health emergency in Alameda County. Now, if you're not paying attention to what's going on in your own district, you might have missed that, but Barbara doesn't miss those things. She's been a leader on disproportionate hiring of people of color in the tech industry and has been screaming about that for years. Eventually it's getting a little bit of attention, but she's been on this for way longer. So I just want to say that because she has her ear to the ground in her own community, here's another one, and it actually comes up in the film, which is the whole issue of business licenses for people of color in the cannabis business. The minute cannabis became legalized in California, big money came into it, and small little, African-American mom and pop shops had a really tough time getting licenses. Well, that's something else Barbara's gone to the mat about. So I just want to say that, what she brings to the table, I think, is so important in terms of what I'm calling keeping her ear to the ground in her own community, and what it reveals, she would say, about systemic racism in America. And so looking to her for leadership around some of these issues is really important, because she's always out there before the issue is well known.
And that's why she is who she is.
That is why she is who she is, exactly. But it's, but when you can do that for 24 years straight and not get exhausted by it, and she would, when you say to her, how are you optimistic, and how do you still have hope, and how do you still have energy? She's like, look, I'm a Black woman in America. We've been fighting for over 400 years. I can't be tired. It's like, there's no time for me to be tired, because there are too many struggles still yet to be fought.
And we need more people. Go ahead.
No, I know. And as she says, we need more, as you were about to say, we need more people. And she's kind of out there motivating the rest of us to do more and to speak up.
I love it. Yeah, she's being a mentor for younger women coming up. And you show that in this film with so many wonderful people that you have in here. But, we're running out of time shortly. But it's so great that she is mentoring them and wanting these younger women in particular, but men also, and encouraging them to run for office and get involved, because the only way we're going to change things is if we do get involved.
Absolutely. And let me say, I started this film closer to 2016, before the 2018 election, which was a sea change election around people of color, more women certainly, but men as well. So she has been joined by a number of very progressive, energetic Congress people from all over the country. And so the Congress doesn't look like it did when I started this film. And I think that, and so I'm sort of encouraging people from whoever may be listening to this, learn more about who your local congressperson is, because there are some up and coming bright lights. Ayanna Pressley from Boston, Cory Bush from St. Louis, Lauren Underwood from Illinois. They're just a bunch of them. Teresa Fernandez from New Mexico. There are just some wonderful younger women who are taking on the mantle of leadership in Congress. And all I can say is, may they keep following in Barbara Lee's footsteps, and as Barbara looks back to help them, they look back to train the next generation coming forward, because as you say, we need it.
Exactly. And that's what it's all about, passing the baton, so everybody, so we always have those kinds of people fighting for us through the years. Barbara, where can people see Barbara Lee speaking?
Yes. Okay. So
power?
there are several places that the film is and will be available. It is going to premiere on the Stars Network on February 1st at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So you have to check your local listings for when it'll be, if you're in Mountain Time or Central Time, check your local listings. But Stars, STARZ Network, February 1st is its broadcast date. It is also available right now for a few bucks on Amazon and iTunes. And you can access it there. Let me give a little shout out that we expect Barbara Lee to be on the Trevor Noah show on Monday night. So if you are a fan of Trevor Noah or Barbara's, please tune in. And, some breaking news could bump her, but for the moment, we expect her to be on there. And we're still doing some film festival runs, but I would say for somebody who wants to see it, either watch it on Stars on February 1st or rent it on Amazon tomorrow. You don't have to wait to do that.
You don't have to wait. Well, thank you.
But you have to know just let me say this. You have to know the name of the film. And the name of the film is Barbara Lee, Speaking Truth to Power, because you have to do a search in Amazon to find it.
Great. Thank you so much. It's a wonderful documentary. People, please seek it out. You'll be inspired, and it's just, you're inspired on all different levels. And she's an amazing woman, and you did an amazing job with the film, Abby. So thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate it.
And thank you for having me.
You're welcome. If you've missed any of the Jan Price shows all about movies, you can find us on my website, thejanpriceshow.com, where all the shows are archived, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, the iHeart Podcast Network, Spotify, Apple, Google, you name it, we are there. We're also on YouTube. Please go to our YouTube channel and subscribe and like us. And you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at The Jan Price Show. Thank you all for listening.